Since Airel could read English very fluently, the secretary asked if they could be allowed to observe for themselves while Airel read the transcripts, and verify that they were correct in writing. They wanted her to write on a copy of the transcript whether the translations were correct, or not, and make a note of anything that was not accurate on the transcripts. Of course, I had no choice but to obey orders, and I did exactly what the secretary requested. I was given a copy of the transcripts, with a signature page, which I was to show to Airel. After Airel completed her review, I was also directed to request that Airel sign. I presented the envelope of transcripts to Airel, and passed on the instructions I had received from the secretary, telepathically. Airel looked at me, and looked at the envelope, without accepting it. Airel said, "If you have read them and they are accurate in your own estimation, there is no need for me to review them also. The translations are correct. You can tell your commander that you have faithfully conveyed a record of our communication." I assured Airel that I had read them, and they were exact recordings of everything I told the transcription typist. "Will you sign the cover page then?" "No, I will not," said Airel. "May I ask why not?" I was a little confused as to why she wasn't willing to do such a simple thing. If your commander does not trust his own staff to make an honest and accurate report to him, what confidence will my signature on the page give him? Why will he trust an ink mark on a page made by an officer of the domain, if he does not trust his own loyal staff? I didn't quite know what to say to that. I couldn't argue with Airel's logic, and I couldn't force her to sign the document either. I sat in my chair for a minute wondering what to do next. I thanked Airel and told her I needed to go ask my superiors for further instructions. I placed the envelope of the transcripts in the inside breast pocket of my uniform jacket and began to rise from my chair. At that moment the door from the gallery room slammed open. 5 heavily armed military police rushed into the room. A man in a white laboratory coat followed closely behind them. He pushed a small cart that carried a box-shaped machine with a lot of dials on the face of it. Before I could react, 2 of the MPs grabbed Airel and held her firmly down in the 2 other MPs grabbed my shoulders and pushed me back down on my chair and held me there. The other MP stood directly in front of Airel, pointing a rifle directly at her, not more than 6 inches from her head. The man in the lab coat quickly wheeled the cart behind Airel's chair. He deftly placed a circular headband over Airel's head and turned back to the machine on the cart. Suddenly, he shouted the word "clear." The soldiers who were holding Airel released her. At that instant, I saw Airel's body stiffen and shudder. After a few minutes, several other men wearing white lab coats entered the room. They briefly examined Airel, who was now slumped listlessly in the chair. They mumbled a few words to each other. One of the men waved to the gallery window. A gurney was immediately rolled into the room by 2 attendants. These men lifted Airel's limp body onto the gurney, strapped her down across her chest and arms, and rolled it out of the room. I was immediately escorted out of the interview room by the MPs and taken directly to my quarters, where I was locked in my room with the MPs remaining on guard outside the door. After about half an hour there was a knock at the door to my quarters. When I opened it, General Twining entered, together with the machine operator in the white lab coat. The general introduced the man to me as Dr. Wilcox. He asked me to accompany him and the doctor. We left the room, followed by the MPs. After several twists and turns through the complex, we entered a small room where Airel had been wheeled on the gurney. The general told me that Airel and the Federation were considered to be a very great military threat to the United States. Airel had been immobilized so that she could not depart and return to her base, as she said she would do in the interview. It would be a very grave risk to national security to allow Airel to report what she observed during her time at the base. So, it had been determined that decisive action was needed to prevent this. The general asked me if I understood why this was necessary. I said that I did, although I most certainly did not agree that it was the least bit necessary, and I certainly did not agree with the surprise attack on Airel and me. Dr. Wilcox asked me to approach the gurney and stand next to Airel. Airel lay perfectly still and unmoving on the bed. I could not tell whether she was alive or dead. Several other men in white lab coats, who I assumed were also doctors, stood on the opposite side of the bed. They had connected two pieces of monitoring equipment to Airel's head, arms, and chest. One of these devices I recognized from my training as a surgical nurse is an EEG machine which is used to detect electrical activity in the brain. The other device was a vital signs monitor, which I knew would be useless since Airel did not have a biological body. Dr. Wilcox explained to me that he had administered a series of mild electroshocks to Airel in an attempt to subdue her long enough to allow the military authorities time to evaluate the situation and determine what to do with her. He asked me to attempt to communicate with Airel, telepathically. I tried for several minutes but couldn't sense any communication from Airel. I couldn't even sense whether Airel was present in the body any longer. "I think you must have killed her," I said to the doctor.